I specifically requested bagpipe New Year's music, so that's why that's there. And also, if you were wondering, they are much, much worse than the American Idol judges, by the way, so they're not nice about it. Well, hey, like he said, my name's Sherry. I hang out at the Bandera Road campus a lot, so I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. And just a little bit about me. My husband and I, we have 2 small kids, and so we're constantly running around chasing them, and so that's fun. My son's 2.5, and my daughter is 10 months old. And actually, not making this up, this very morning, my 10-month-old daughter took her very first steps. Real thing that happened in my house. Yep, it's really cool. It happened immediately after I left the house this morning. I'm not bitter about it, but I am. And so when I started to have kids, I started to, I think we all do this. We start thinking through what we want for their lives, and we start thinking through and praying for the things that we want for them. And in this season, I've been praying for something very specific for my children. And the thing I've been praying for is that I have a deep desire for them always to have a sense of belonging. And because one of the most painful human experiences is the feeling of not belonging. It plays out early in life when the neighborhood kids don't let us play in their treehouse. And it gets more and more painful as we experience true heartbreak and rejection throughout our lives. So most of my schooling is in psychology, and the reason my schooling is in psychology is actually rooted directly in my pain of not belonging. So I'll explain. I went to a very small conservative Christian college that you've never heard of, so I won't even bother mentioning the name. And when I got there, I was fired up, guys. I wanted to change the world, and I wanted to help people. And I knew that God's call in my life was to be in ministry. And it was really, really easy for me to find other people to fit in with, right? That they wanted to change the world. They wanted to help people too. But it got a little fuzzy for me when I got more specific about my calling. When I would tell people that I wanted to be a pastor, they would get this weird look on their face. And I would get asked questions like, oh, so you mean you're going to marry a pastor? No. I guess like pastors need wives too, but it didn't fit in their minds. See, they had a very, very traditional church view of what a woman's role in the church could be. It was okay if you married a pastor. It was okay if maybe you wanted to work with children or maybe with other women. But the idea of a woman leading or communicating in a church was just absolutely off limits. And so, to maintain my fitting in, I kind of stuffed down this part of my calling and I didn't talk about it anymore. But like happens when you're in college, right? Semester by semester, your classes start to get more and more specific to your major. And so one day I had to walk into a pastoral ministry class. When I walked in, the professor looked at me. He got this weird look on his face and he asked me if I was in the wrong class. I said no. And then he spent the rest of that semester explaining to me in both word and action that I did not belong there. The icing on the cake was the last day of the semester as kind of like a fun exercise. We took a field trip to this professor's church. And what we were gonna do was we were gonna baptize the church's children's minister over and over again as like a practical exercise, right? So we didn't like drown someone the first time we tried to baptize them, I guess. It's harder than it looks, guys. And so we get there, and everybody's going through, and we're baptizing this children's minister over and over again, poor guy. And then it's my turn. And so I walk up to the side of the tub, and this professor kind of yells over the chatter in the room. He says, "Enjoy this, Sherry. It's the only time you'll ever get to do it." And the men in my class just erupted in laughter. I didn't belong. I didn't fit in with this group of men. And if I didn't fit in with this group of men, then I almost certainly didn't belong in ministry. I was so devastatingly heartbroken. I must have gotten it wrong. And I changed my major the very next day. And that's how I ended up with a psychology degree, because I didn't belong. One of the most painful moments of my life, and probably some of the most painful moments in your life, are rooted in not belonging. We've all experienced it. It's one of the most painful experiences in life because belonging is actually crucial and critical to every single one of our lives. This shouldn't be shocking to anyone who's taken a basic psychology course, because one of the very first things you're taught is the first thing they put in front of you is this funny triangle. It's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what it is it's basically the things that every person needs to survive and to thrive in life, right? So the bottom layer, we have all these physiological needs, things like food, water, air. Next, we have protection needs, things like shelter, protection, Netflix, very basic amenities. But the next layer, what surprises people is the third most fundamental thing to our well-being is love and belonging. We all get that we need food and water and air and things like that. But could belonging really be that crucial? But neuroscience proves this right every single time. See, when you feel like you don't belong somewhere, your brain actually reacts the exact same way it does when you don't have food or water. It goes into literal survival mode. And when your brain goes into survival mode, it starts to shut down all non-essential functions in your brain so that it can hunt for and find the thing that it needs. Ironically, the first thing that your brain shuts down when it goes into survival mode is your ability to make emotionally mature decisions. So when you feel like you don't belong and your brain goes into survival mode, you start hunting the room frantically, like a high school lunchroom or like a Southwest flight, for anything that you might possibly be able to fit in with, while your brain simultaneously shuts down the part of your brain that helps you make emotionally mature decisions. This is how 90% of my dating relationships started. Probably most of yours too, right? When we don't belong, our brain gets it. And it goes into survival mode because it gets better than we do. That belonging is so crucial. In my story, when I didn't belong, I went into this emotional tailspin trying to find anything or anyone that I might possibly be able to fit in with. And ultimately, where I found myself was in the social sciences, where my gender was considered an asset and not a deficit. Now, for a very long time, psychologists, when they looked at that pyramid and they saw that belonging layer, they thought that kind of itch could be scratched by simply us being connected to other people, like we have friends or we have neighbors or we say hey, and that would fulfill that. But we had to start thinking about belonging differently. When the connection in our society went up at an exponential rate and our sense of belonging dropped drastically, we discovered that there must be something more to it. Because back in the day, right, you were lucky to find one person who was the same kind of weird as you. Right now you can get online and you can find dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of people that are the same kind of weird as you, right? You can fit in a flash. It's right there in front of you, right at your fingertips. But what we found is that there is a distinct difference between fitting in and belonging. Some groups of middle schoolers across the country were asked to describe the difference between fitting in and belonging. And this is what they had to say. They said, belonging is being somewhere you want to be and they want you. Fitting in is being somewhere that you want to be, but they don't care one way or the other. Belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted for being like everyone else. And if I get to be me, I belong. If I have to be like you, I fit in. Fitting in begins and ends with fitting a mold. But belonging is something different. It's bigger, it's bolder, and when we really grasp it, it changes everything. So how can you and I learn to belong even when we don't fit in? The Apostle Paul, one of the most prolific writers of the New Testament, got belonging. He understood it very, very well. So some background on Paul, he was Jewish. And over the course of his life, he had developed every single credential that you could possibly have to fit in the Jewish culture. He was all about fitting in, guys. He was like a mean girl, all right? If you haven't seen Mean Girls, go watch Mean Girls. That's your homework. But he was a mean girl. But he wasn't just not going to let you sit with him, right, if you didn't fit in. He was going to seek you out and harass you and maybe even harm you. Why? Because you were different than him. Because you didn't fit in. But then Paul met Jesus. And it changed him radically. And as a result, he began to travel the world and tell other people about what Jesus had done for him. But what was unique about Paul was that God had called him to do something very specific. God called him to share the message with Gentiles. Those were non-Jewish people. These were the people that were most different from him. And his friendship with these Gentiles crossed a very distinct line in the Jewish culture. And he immediately faced criticism. And even Paul himself no longer fit in with his own Jewish culture. Yet, even though he didn't fit in with this group that he had always identified with, he still had a deep sense of belonging. And he told us why. In Galatians, in his letter to the Galatians, Paul says, "There is no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." What Paul is saying is that as important as ethnicity or social status or gender are, if you have a relationship with Jesus, it supersedes every other fact that might help you to fit in. It guarantees that you belong. Before Paul knew Jesus, he thought that his only choice was to fit the mold, to fulfill his instinctive need to belong, an instinctive need that every single one of us has. But after he met Jesus, he experienced love and acceptance, and that outflanked everything. When Paul discovered the truth about belonging, fitting in didn't have to be the name of the game anymore. He could belong even if he didn't fit in, and so can we. So how is it possible to do this? How is it possible to belong even when we don't fit in? And how does knowing Jesus help us do this? One of my personal heroes is Dr. Brené Brown. She's a social scientist. She's a psych nerd like me. And she recently wrote a book about belonging. And she identified 3 things that are crucial if we want to learn to truly belong. They're what she called having a strong back, having a soft front, and having a wild heart. 3 qualities that we can see in the Apostle Paul's life because he belonged to Jesus. Strong back. A strong back is what allows us to stand on the strength of our convictions. In language we all get, it means to have a spine and stand up for what we know is right. Before Paul knew Jesus, his strong back had everything to do with fitting in and with towing the line. But after Paul knew Jesus, his strong back was rooted in belonging to Jesus and doing what he knew was right, rather than doing what it would take for him to fit in. And a soft front. A soft front has to do with loving others. Before Paul knew Jesus, Paul did not have a soft front. Paul had an armored front. He hated people that were different than him. But after Paul met Jesus, his front became soft, and he lived the rest of his days loving others. The reason that he had such a drastic change was because he had experienced Jesus' love. And the last change we see in Paul is his wild heart. Before Paul met Jesus, he did not have a wild heart. He had a very caged heart, and his cage was made up of all of the rules and standards that he had to meet to fit in with his own ethnic culture. But when he met Jesus, he developed a tremendously wild heart. This is why Paul laid his life on the line to follow the calling that God had for him and to defy everyone's expectations of him. Jesus made him brave. Remember what those middle schoolers said? They said, belonging is being somewhere that you want to be and they want you. Fitting in is being somewhere that you want to be, but they don't care one way or the other. Here at City West, we want you. We aren't about fitting in. We're not worried about church tradition or keeping you in your cage of fitting in. We're about people belonging, even if that means breaking a church mold. And if you need a reminder of that, you're sitting in a bar right now. Like for real, guys, you're sitting in a bar right now. We're not about meeting those church traditions or those church standards. We're about belonging. Belonging is bigger, it's bolder, it's more powerful, it's life-changing, and it has nothing to do with being the same and has everything to do with love. But more importantly, you don't have to fit in here or anywhere to belong to Jesus. And when we get that, when we really let that sink in, when we really understand what it means to belong to Jesus, we can actually start to belong to ourselves. Remember what Paul said. There is no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female. Belonging to Jesus supersedes all of our fitting in. And when you don't feel like you have to fit in anymore, your view of yourself no longer has to be caged by what other people say about you or what other people think about you. You can be you and you can belong with yourself. Because if we get really real, many of our struggles don't have to do with not belonging with other people. Many of our struggles come from not being able to belong with ourselves. Guys, if you're constantly telling yourself that you're not good enough, that's fitting in. That isn't belonging. Stop it. Belong instead. You've been accepted by the God of the universe. Stop rejecting yourself. When Paul met Jesus and began to understand what true belonging is, he was free to be himself and to follow his unique calling without worrying about fitting in anymore. One of my favorite poets and activists is Maya Angelou. And she says, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but she says that freedom is when you don't have to fit in anymore. Freedom is when you don't have to fit in anywhere. Then suddenly you belong everywhere. She would tell you, though, that the price is high, but the reward is great. So how do we do this? We have to develop a strong back, a soft front, and a wild heart. Strong back. You have to know what you believe. You have to know what's most important to you, and you have to hold it tightly. You have to do what's right, even in the face of opposition. If you don't know what you believe outside of the groups that you fit in with, you need to take a pause and you need to take some time to discover that. Because strictly or simply prescribing to the convictions and the beliefs of those that are immediately around you, guys, that's fitting in. That's not belonging. You can do better. Have a strong back. But never let your strong back or your strong convictions get in the way of your soft front. Your soft front is what allows you to love people. And we have to love people, period. We have to love them for who they are, where they are, and facilitate true belonging for others. The trick is that we have to love people more than our preferences. We don't have to look like one another or to believe like one another or even agree at all to belong to one another if we can have a soft front. An armored front can't facilitate belonging. Strong back, soft front, wild heart. A wild heart means you have to fulfill your unique purpose and calling, not everyone else's expectation of you. You have to understand who you are and who you were uniquely created to be. You have to follow your calling. And if you don't know what that looks like, you need to take some time to discover your wild heart. Simply jumping through people's hoops to meet their expectations, it's fitting in, it's not belonging. Fitting in is easy, but belonging is bigger, it's better, it's bolder, it's life-giving. The price is high, but the reward is great. So as we enter this new year, what if we challenged ourselves, not on maybe workouts per week, I'm sorry if I'm offending you. Not on workouts per week workouts per week or maybe weight loss goals. What if we decided that this year we were going to do something different? What if we spent this year committed to belonging to ourselves and showing others God's love and facilitating true belonging for others? Because it's time to get honest. Most of us spent 2017 and probably a lot of years before that, just like me, fitting in. If we want to move beyond this to belonging, we have to have a strong back, a soft front, and a wild heart. The price is high, but the reward is great. So when I was in college, I failed at all three of these things. My strong back bent in the face of opposition. My soft front became armored as I worked hard to protect myself from feeling that kind of pain again. And my wild heart became caged to wherever I currently fit in. But we're all very fortunate that God is in the business of redemption. He redeemed my running away, and I ran far away. And I get to use my schooling and counseling and psychology every single day to try to help people. He's placed me in incredible communities where I can truly belong and around people who I can truly belong with. And he's given me a front row seat to so many changed lives. I am so thrilled that that professor was wrong. I am so thrilled that that mock baptism 9 years ago was not my last. I've been blessed to get to baptize hundreds of people, had a front row seat to hundreds of changed lives. And the road hasn't been easy. It's still not easy. But it wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't discovered that true belonging starts by belonging to Jesus. If I hadn't thrown out others' expectations of me, I could have never learned to belong to myself. The price has been high, but the reward has been great. So let's move past towing the line. Let's move past others' expectations of us. Let's move past our expectations for others. And let's spend this year finding true belonging. The price will be high, but the reward will be great. Will you guys pray with me? God, thank you. Thank you for letting us belong to you. Thank you for letting us have something far bigger and far better than simply fitting in. God, I pray as we enter this new year, God, that I pray that you would show each and every one of us what true belonging looks like. God, I pray a special blessing over every single person in this room as we enter this new year, God, that you would just shower them with blessings. We love you, and it's in your name that we pray. Amen.